going to be discussing completing the closing disclosure. And once again, I'd like to welcome everyone, all of our clients that's deciding to join the training today, the webinar. Today is February 2nd, 2016. And once again, our class today is going to be over completing the closing disclosure. Okay, and my name is Brian Robinson. I'm a professional service consultant, and I've been in the mortgage industry over 20 years, primarily as a conventional underwriter. I've also been a processor as well. Pretty much done wholesale, correspondent, and retail. And of course, I've served my country as well. So I'm very delighted to be here to be training you guys today. Now, for the first line of business, we need to do a little bit of webinar cleaning, housekeeping, I'd like to say. Now, to get the most out of this training, all attendees are muted. If you guys currently have your point open on your computer, I strongly encourage you to follow along. The PowerPoint slides are going to be available now through the GoToWebinar handouts. Once again, that's located in your control panel under the handout section. Okay, and a recording of this webinar in PowerPoint, it will be available soon on our website. And at the end of the webinar, if we have time, we're going to do some questions and answers. Once again, if we have time. I'd like to take the time to read the disclaimer, the legal disclaimer. The information presented is confidential and proprietary to CALYX software and may not be disclosed without the permission of CALYX. Now, the purpose of this PowerPoint presentation is to provide information rather than advice or opinion. It is accurate and to the best of the speaker's knowledge as of the date of the presentation. Now, to the extent that this presentation contains any examples, please note that they are for illustrative purposes and only a similarity to actual individuals and entities, places, as well as situations is unintentional and purely coincidental. In addition, any examples that are not intended to serve as legal advice, no part of the presentation may be modified, printed, or presented without the permission of CALYX. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get into our training now. The format, for today's format, we're going to be viewing a PowerPoint. I have a few slides for you guys to look at, to highlight, and also kind of do an overview of what we're discussing here regarding the closing disclosure. We're also going to, I'm going to open up a actual point file, and we're going to go in and we're going to look at the closing costs worksheet, and we're going to start with how to populate the information onto the closing costs worksheet. And then we're going to also look at the closing disclosure as well as how those two feed off of one another. We're going to also look at the resources. I'm going to give you guys some helpful tips, some knowledge-based articles that you can refer back to for further training. Okay. So, our objectives for today. Now, in today's webinar, we're going to show you how to navigate the closing costs worksheet and the closing disclosure. We're going to also show you how to populate the escrowed amounts. We're going to also show you how to enter those fees, charges, credits, and payoffs. I'm going to show you how to enter in the lender, the seller, and the real estate information. That's located on the track agent list screen. Also, we're going to also understand how the closing costs worksheet populates into the closing disclosure. We're going to also use the lockbox to manage the roundings, which I'll definitely show you guys that. We're also going to generate the seller-only version of the closing disclosure. And of course, we're going to use some of the helpful hints as well. Okay, now I'm sure that most of you all have had the question or have a question regarding to, how or what does the fee, how does the mapping go into the closing disclosure? Well, just as on the fees worksheet, it's pretty similar. On your closing costs worksheet, of course, Section 1, that's the origination charges, well, on the closing disclosure is Section A, origination charges. Section 2, your credit and charge for specific interest rate chosen, that's, of course, also Section A on the closing disclosure. And I am going to show you all an example of how this information populates and flows from the closing costs worksheet into the closing disclosure. And of course, as you see, moving on down the page, the required services that we select, Section 3 for the closing costs worksheet is Section B. Now, here are some differences from the fees worksheet versus the closing costs worksheet and how it flows into the closing disclosure. Section 4, where it says title services and lender title insurance, as you see here, it says that's Section 4 on the closing costs worksheet, but on the closing disclosure, it's Section B and C, services that the borrower did not shop for, as well as services that the borrower did shop for. So Section 4 on the closing costs worksheet is identical to Section 6 as far as how it populates and flows over to the closing disclosure. Of course, there's that owner's title insurance, that Section 5 on the closing costs worksheet, that flows over into Section H, which is other charges. And I'll just quickly go down the line here. Section 7, the government recording charges, is actually Section E on the closing disclosure, as well as Section 8 on the closing costs worksheet, the transfer taxes, that's also Section E. Section 9 on the closing costs worksheet, initial deposit for your escrow account, that is in Section G on the closing disclosure, initial escrow payments at closing. The daily interest charges, Section 10 on your closing costs worksheet, flows over into Section F, the prepaids, and so does Section 11, which is your homeowner's insurance on the closing costs worksheet. That's Section F on the closing disclosure. Your prepaid section, that information obviously flows over into Section F, and the other charges, as I mentioned before, flows over into Section H on the closing disclosure. Now, I just want to give you guys some reminders, information for the closing disclosure, of course, that's going to populate from other forms within Point. Of course, your borrower information and the 1003, the application itself, your truth in lending screen, your track agent list, as well as the actual closing costs worksheet itself. All four of those entities flow into the closing disclosure. So that's what actually how everything populates and where it populates from, those particular forms within Point. Okay, now populating the escrow amounts. If you notice here on the PowerPoint illustration here, Section 9 on the closing costs worksheet, there are some little boxes over here to the far right, as you can see highlighted, and it's under the Escrowed column. Okay, it's the far right column, and it has Escrowed. So for your hazard insurance, for your property taxes, as well as if there's flood insurance, okay, if there is going to be an escrow account or if these items are to be escrowed, the checkbox on the closing costs worksheet, it needs to say yes. And the only way that it's going to say yes is if you select these little boxes out here where it says escrow. Here at the very bottom, which I'm going to once again show you all an example, another example once we get into a point file. You can see here that the property taxes were escrowed. Of course, it says yes because this is selected, as well as your homeowner's insurance. It also says yes, but notice the HOA dues, which are located in Section 9. That's where one of the places that you have to input them. We just have a monthly amount. We don't have a amount of months that we're collecting for. And of course, that box is not selected, so of course it says no here for the HOA dues. Okay, and let's see here. Okay, so this is how you populate the escrow amounts over into the closing disclosure. Okay, now populating the settlement agent. This was something that the clients was inquiring about, and of course this has been added, of course, 2 points so you can populate this information. Now the closing agent, all of this information here that you see on the screen, this information is accessed on the track agent list screen. Okay, there's a drop down box, and it's going to have escrow company, I think it's going to say attorney, escrow company, and then settlement statement. I'm not quite sure if it's in this particular order, but these are the 3 selections from the drop down. And as you see, you just select settlement agent and input the information. Unless you have it already in your CALYX, you can just manually go in and type in this information. Okay, the information then flows once you populate the actual closing disclosure. The settlement agent information is just below the disbursement date, which I'll definitely show you an example of this. Okay, now if we're wanting to populate our real estate agent, for the buyer or the seller, that information also is located at the top of the track list screen. So that information can be manually input, of course, or you can access this information by way of your CALYX, which the information should be saved to your system already. But you can enter the information for the buyer as well as the seller. The track agent screen has a wealth of information that you can include on your in regards to adding different entities that's linked to the loan. Now, if you're wanting to add additional sellers in point, the way that you would do that, you would go to the very top where it says Banker, the Banker menu, and there's a drop down where it'll say Closing Documents, and from there you go to the Basic Loan Information. Okay, and this is where you would add in the seller information. And I'll definitely show you guys an example of this so you guys will know exactly how to populate that information. I'm also going to show you in this hour, I'm going to show you how you can also access the borrower. Let's say if there's a co-borrower or 2 or 3 different borrowers where you can add those borrowers, and their information will end up on the same addendum that this information here is going to end on, that the additional sellers will end on. So will end up on. So on the closing disclosure, it actually would be a page 6 because it would be a new addendum. You would have the seller information, the additional sellers, as well as any additional borrowers. And I'll definitely show you that information. Okay, and this, of course, is where you would actually add that seller information on the borrower information screen. You would select Add, and at this point, you would just simply go in and add the name and the company information, their relationship on title. If the seller is a trust or a corporation, that's very important. That's very important. Okay. And this is actually what it will look like on the closing disclosure. This is the actual addendum, adding the additional sellers. Okay. As you see here, it also even added the additional applicants on here, as I was explaining a little earlier, which I'm going to show you that information. But the additional sellers, it will be shown on the addendum on the closing disclosure. Okay, this is where you would actually enter the aggregate adjustment on the closing costs worksheet. You would enter it in section 9, of course, where it says initial deposits for your escrow. And down here below is where you would actually enter your aggregate adjustment. You would enter that information right here. Now, I do want to also kind of let you guys know that this information here, as far as like, and I know we're discussing the closing costs worksheet, but this information here, you would not even enter it on the fees worksheet because it does not populate over to our loan estimate form. It does not, actually I said that incorrectly. It does not have to be disclosed on the loan estimate form, but it does have to be disclosed on the closing disclosure. Okay, and this is how you do the aggregate adjustment here. You would set the cushion and designate the months of payment for each item in the initial escrow setup window. Just as you see it illustrated here, there's a 2-month cushion for the taxes. Taxes are due April as well as December. As far as the insurance, there's a 2-month cushion. Insurance, of course, due in full in January, same as the flood insurance. That's identical. Okay. So now, in regards to the aggregate adjustment, okay, once we actually populate the closing disclosure, you'll see on page 2 in section G that the initial escrow payment, what it's going to be at closing. It's actually, excuse me, under the initial escrow payment at closing, as you see here illustrated where it says $902. Okay, so now you're at the point where you say, okay, well, I've completed my closing disclosure. Okay, well now what? Okay, now you can store your documents in document management in the e-loan file section. You can store that information in what's called Inkit, which I'm going to illustrate Inkit for you as well, and how a potential borrower would, let's say, go to your webcaster, fill out an application. You guys basically download it onto Point, and at that point, then you can begin to send out documents that need to be signed, such as the 1003 and whatever prudent documentation that's needed. You can send that information directly to the borrower's email, okay, which is, of course, the next little section where it says, or email for borrower acknowledgement. You also can request the closing disclosure from the document provider. Okay, and of course, some helpful tips here. You know, you can streamline the data entry, you know, by setting up your closing cost scenario templates, and these templates are basically used to avoid repeated data entry for regular loans, costs, and they help to reduce errors. Other information as far as that can be helpful for you guys is utilizing the escrow and the title tables. Now, these options are there to create title tables for standard escrows as well as title fees. Your tax tables, you can create a drop-down list for the transfer taxes. You know, that's just an FYI there. A lot of people definitely do that. Some people input the exact amount. I'm sorry. Some people input the exact amount, but you can create a drop-down list for your transfer taxes. And of course, the aggregate adjustment. You can set up the initial escrow account in the company defaults. Okay, and this last screen here is basically, you know, how are you going to get help? How are you going to have some support as you go through generating your closing disclosure and working with the closing cost worksheet? Well, the help basically is going to come from our knowledge base articles. As you see, we have 6 knowledge base articles listed here, from how to complete the closing cost worksheet to how to complete the closing disclosure, how to enter the sellers on the closing disclosure. So that information is right there handy for you guys. Also, there are other resources. As you see here, you can hit F1 from any screen. There's a point user guide that's embedded in your software. Of course, our website, CALYXsoftware.com, our customer support number, as well as your account manager and sales number, you know, or another resource is professional services for those of you all that would require private training. Okay, so now let's go ahead and go to a point file, and I've already did some work on this file here. What I'd like to do, this of course is the closing cost worksheet. What I'd like to do, I'd like to first show you all how you can pull up both the fees and the closing cost worksheet, the fees worksheet and the closing cost worksheet together. So here at the very bottom, if you click where it says keep open, okay, and then we're going to go ahead and go to our fees worksheet, because that's where all of my information has populated from, over in this section. Okay, and then you can go to the very top where it says window, and you can select tile vertically, and at this point you'll be able to look at both of them, the fees worksheet as well as your closing cost worksheet. And I'm going to make some room here so you guys can see this a little bit better. Can everyone see the screen pretty decent? Okay, good. Okay, so here we have our fees worksheet. We have all of our fees on here. We have all of our pertinent information. We know that this is going to be a TRID loan. So all of this information is filled out properly. We don't have any freeze on the loan amount or what have you, because that's dealing with the loan estimate form. So right here, this functionality right here at the very top of the closing cost worksheet, you can select copy from fees worksheet, and your information is automatically going to flow right over, just as it was looking on the fees worksheet from top to bottom. Okay, from top to bottom. And here's that aggregate information there. We'll get to that in just a second. I just wanted to show you guys how you can actually review or look at your closing cost worksheet along with your fees worksheet as it populates over. So now we have our closing cost worksheet, and we're just going to start from top to bottom. You see the date prepared, of course. We're going to go ahead and input a disbursement date, and we'll just put March 1st, and I'm just going to put a number in here for the mortgage insurance certification number. Of course, you see my loan program, all of this information automatically populated over, even my lender information. It's Super Bowl week, so of course I have Super Bowl way mortgage for you sports fans out there. But as you see, going down in section 1, where we have the originator, the loan origination fee. This is section A, of course, and that information is just going to populate right over here. We'll just go ahead and we'll input a good amount. We'll put 7,000 for this guy. Okay, and then of course moving on down, you have your processing fee, your origination fee. Moving along with the drop downs in section 1, you have your doc prep fee, which your doc prep fee, of course, is in the drop down, and you just enter that information in. But there are other selections for whatever particular fees. There's commitment fee, courier, and if there's a fee that's not in here, then you can just simply go in and manually type the information in there. We'll just say this one is going to be a and I'm just illustrating this just so you can see how this information flows in. You can just type it in, very simple. Okay, and let's see, moving on to section 2. If by chance, if there are any lender credits or anything like that, this is where this information would go, right here in Okay, can you guys hear me? Okay, cool. Thanks to modern technology, I have gotten things back right. So we'll go ahead and continue where I left off, and I definitely apologize, but we had some technical difficulties over here, but we got it squared away. Back in section 2, and entering in the lender credits, you would enter that information in right in here, and I'm just going to input it and then probably take it out. I just want you guys to see. You can input a percent right here or an actual dollar amount, and that information, of course, will flow right there in this little box here. You'll need to select this box here to copy as a lender credit, and it will also show on line L on page 4 of the 1003, and it will also show at the very bottom of this page here. And we'll get to that as we continue to scroll to the very bottom. As you see in section 3, we have all of our appraisal fees. We have our title fees, and that information is input right here. Of course, the company name goes right there as well. Moving along to Section 4. Section 4, of course, is the title services and lender title insurance. That's where that information will go. Now, if the borrower is going to have a single provider for all services, this is where they would need to select right here. And it would automatically populate that information to acknowledge that the borrower has a single provider for all of the services. Okay. Okay. I'm just going to answer a quick question. Barbara's asking a question. She says the company names are not populating to my doc prep company. Do I know why? Yes, actually, if you go back to the very top here, where it says pay to lender or broker, whichever you guys will fit in, you would select this little box here, and as you notice, when I select the boxes, it unhighlights my company name now, because that's the only company name that I have. So basically that's saying, okay, well, either I want to change the name or I don't want the name to populate. So make sure to select that little box right there, and as you go down and you continue to select, lender, broker, or whatever the scenario may be, you'll see that that information will automatically populate. Okay, I hope that answered your question, Barbara. Okay, and continuing to move along. Now the appraiser names, and this is another question from Barbara, but the appraiser names, that information you will have to enter manually. For the appraiser names, as well as for the credit and title, you'll have to enter that information in manually on this screen here. In the track agent list screen, then you can enter that information, and of course you can populate it from your Cordex. Okay. Moving along here, you see Section 5, your owner's title insurance. That information would go in there. Section 6 is just like Section 4, the services that they can or, excuse me, let me make sure I say it correctly. Services that the borrowers did shop for or did not shop for. Okay, and of course there are drop downs here. Remember what I said about the drop downs. If there's any fee that would fit in Section 6 or Section 4 or any of these sections, and you do not see it located in the drop down, then you would need to simply go ahead and enter it in manually. Moving on to Section 7. Moving on to Section 7, the mortgage and deed information would go right in here, just as you see illustrated. My fees may be high or they may be low, but please remember this is just for training purposes that I input fees in there. I tried to get them as close as possible to the real numbers. Section 8 are transfer taxes. This information would go right in here. In Section E, it flows over to Section E on the closing disclosure. Here's Section 9, and I want to go ahead and kind of toggle just a little bit, because if you notice, I don't have any information. I don't have the dollar amount in here yet, but I want to show you on the borrower information screen, as you can see here. Okay, on the borrower information screen here at the very bottom where it says expenses, this right here is no longer attached to the closing costs worksheet nor the fees worksheet. Okay, it's no longer attached. And give me 1 second here. I apologize if there's any background noise. Okay, so what we'll do here, since we know that the hazard insurance has to be paid, Actually, we'll just put hazard insurance in there temporarily, and we'll do other, and we'll put a dollar amount. I think it was $73. For the property taxes, same thing. We'll go ahead and enter this information here. And the reason that I'm entering this information is because I want to show you all an example of an escrow account versus one that's not an escrow account. Okay, and as far as populating the escrow information. And flood insurance, we'll go ahead and we'll just say $110 a month, and we'll collect 6 months. Okay, so in this section here for the aggregate adjustment, we're going to go ahead and input what we're actually having as a cushion here for this particular borrower. And we know they have hazard insurance, flood insurance. We're going to go ahead and say that the taxes are due in April as well as December, and we'll keep it consistent with the insurance. We know that that's due once a year. Okay, so this is how the aggregate information would flow out. Okay, as we continue to move down, okay, in section 10, that's for your daily interest charges. Section 11, that's for your homeowner's insurance. If you notice that $73 I just input up here, it flowed right down to here. So now it gives us a full amount for the full year. And of course, the flood insurance, that information would go in here as well. Actually, let me just go ahead and stay consistent with it, and we'll go ahead and input the flood. And see, I think we collected 4 months at $110. Okay. Moving right along in the section for the prepaids. Okay, we still have the same drop-down boxes, and of course you can make your selection, and you can fill it in just as you filled in 1 through 11, section 1 through 11, and that information would flow into this particular section. There's that lender's credit there that we gave that the lender, showing up right there. Okay. What I would like to do at this time, I'd like to go ahead and before I populate the closing disclosure, I want to go to the track agent screen just so everyone can see exactly where information goes as far as the seller and the real estate broker, buyer, as well as seller. Okay. We're on the track agent list screen, and of course I am the lender, and I have the company name. All of this information here is going to populate over on the closing disclosure. There's our real estate broker information for the buyer as well as for the seller. Here's our closing agent information, which I explained to you guys. You click on the drop-down box. I was correct. It says attorney, escrow company, and settlement statement, or settlement agent, excuse me. So this is where that information would go. And this information here, as you will see, will flow over through the to the closing disclosure. Here's our seller's information. And of course our seller is Cam Newton. I'm not sure if there are any Carolina fans out there, but I went ahead and put him as a seller. And this is how this information would be put in there. You would just simply go to your Cordex, which is located right here, as well as under utilities, and it's the second from the drop down is how you would select your Cordex. And let me go ahead and demonstrate that while I have everybody on here, so we'll make sure that we're on the same page. Okay, let's say for instance we want to do I'll just put my name in there. Let's see. We'll do it like that. Have the category. Okay, we're going to save this. Okay. Give me 1 second because we actually need to be able to select. Okay, here we go. Okay. Okie dokie. Okay. And I definitely apologize, but the information will flow from the CALYX database. For whatever reason right now, it's not doing it on my system, but it does flow over from your CALYX. The other place where you would enter in the seller's information, the additional sellers, you would go to the banker screen, and you would go to where it says closing documents, basic loan information, and this is where you would enter in, right here where it says sellers, you would enter in the seller information. And we'll go ahead and enter in another seller here, just for training purposes here. As you see, I also included Peyton Manning for you Denver fans out there, not to leave anybody out. But you would enter the information in here, and I'm just going to, just for training purposes as well as for time, just enter some information so you can just simply see how it populates. But the information would populate right there. So also to populate an additional borrower, okay, we'll go to the borrower information screen real quickly. And as you see, I have one borrower in here, but I've also added 2 borrowers. Okay, I've added Peyton and Eli. Added their information. This information here, when I get ready to populate my closing disclosure, this information here is going to all be there on the 6th page. Okay, so we'll go ahead and go to our closing cost worksheet. Okay, because on the closing cost worksheet, at the very bottom, you notice it says closing disclosure. So we're going to go ahead and click on that. Okay, and from the closing disclosure, we're going to go ahead and do an issue date, and we're going to do a potential closing date. And let's see, we'll just say the 26th, and disbursement date. Okay, that's we'll better make it a little bit. Yeah, 26th. Okay, so and then from here on the closing disclosure, you also have access, if there are any payoffs or payments, you have access to add that information in right here under the payoff and payment section. Let me just, I'm just going to add one liability. And let's see, we're just going to say credit, just so you all can see how it populates. We're going to go to page 3 of the 1003. There's our liability. And I apologize if I'm going a little too fast. But you would double click on this liability. You'll need to identify the liability type. And you can put a balance on there. We'll just say 10,000. And we'll just say 60 months. And an account number. The key to this is that you must select where it says will be paid off. That has to be selected. And then we're going to save and close. Okay. And now we're going to go back to our closing costs, our closing disclosure. Okay.
Let me actually, before I do that, let me go back to our original bar. And so we'll go to the closing disclosure. Okay, and if you notice here at the bottom again, there's a payment and payoff section. Once you have a liability in here that you want to pay off, you would come to this particular screen and just simply click on Copy from Liabilities. Remember that you have to have the liability, and actually the reason it's not populating is because I entered it in under the other borrowers. So give me one quick second, let me make that adjustment, and I apologize. And if we go over with the time, I do know that we had some technical difficulties, so I mean that's totally fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. Give me one second. I'm just gonna let this populate so you guys can see how it actually looks on the payoffs and payments section. Okay. Back on the payoffs and payments screen, you just simply click on Copy from Liabilities, and that information flows over. I don't think I put a dollar amount in there. Okay, we are going to get through this day, I tell you. Okay, and let me get back to that closing disclosure. And I definitely apologize because I know you guys, the screen is just going crazy over the net here. Okay, so there we go. Okay, as you see, the creditor is in there, the person that's going to be paid off, as well as the actual dollar amount. So what we're going to do at this point, we're going to go ahead and do a file print preview. Okay, and we're going to do a print preview, and I'm wanting to include all of the disclosure. Okay, and we'll do a print preview here. And real quickly, let's see, if the co-borrowers have payoffs, it will populate. You'll just need to enter that information in on their, you'll need to enter that information in when you enter in those co-borrowers, and that information will populate. Moving down the screen here, now if you notice, this says no. As far as the escrow, it says no here. Okay, keep that in mind because we're going to come back to this, and I'm going to show you guys how, if you have an escrow account, how we actually will say yes. But moving from the top to the bottom, the settlement agent information is right up here. Okay, we have the date issue, of course. There's the file number for the settlement agent. There's our seller right there, Cam Newton, and of course the lender. This is a test file. Everything pretty much looks like our loan estimate form on the first page. Very detailed information here under the cost at closing. You see there's that seller, that lender credit. I apologize, I can't talk today. The $1,600 lender credit, and it says see page 2 for details. And let me zoom in so you guys can see that maybe a little bit better. Okay, and just real quick, Angie has a question. You do not need to check the box for other or HOA dues. That information automatically populates once you enter in the hazard insurance information in section 9 on either the fees worksheet or the closing cost worksheet. Okay, and of course, these are all of the fees that were entered. Everything, of course, is Dress Right Dress, has the company's name, and it even has the actual, what the actual fee is for. So that information will be there. Okay, in section 3, are there any changes on this loan? Well, in this particular scenario, well, yes, there was. There was a big change in the closing costs. So it identified that, and it acknowledges that for the borrower. Okay, that's page 4 or 5. This information here flows from the Truth in Lending Reg Z. That's where this information to the left, where it talks about assumption, demand feature, late payments, that flows from your Truth in Lending. Okay. Page 5, this is our contact information for the lender, for the real estate broker, the buyer, the seller, as well as the settlement agent. Okay. There's the next page, and this page here, as you see, is going to have the all of the applicants on here, even the 2 that I added, as well as the sellers. Okay, so that information does populate over. Excuse me. Now what I'd like to quickly do is to show you how the escrow account will look if there's escrow. Okay, which I actually did this on purpose, so we could go back and revisit this. Okay, so here we are again in section 9. We're going to select the hazard insurance, the property taxes, as well as the flood. Okay, and then we'll go back to the closing disclosure. You can locate it at the very bottom of the page. And then we'll go ahead and we'll redo a print preview. And remember, you want to make sure to populate all of the pages that you need for the closing disclosure. Okay, now our closing disclosure is going to look just a little bit differently here as soon as it populates. Okay, and let me zoom in just a little bit. Now, if you notice here now, where it says estimated escrow taxes, and now this information, it says yes for taxes and insurance. We are going to escrow for taxes and insurance. No for your homeowner's insurance, of course. Okay, and we're just going to go through. Let's see here, just so you guys can get a visual. Okay, and this is that, of course, that addendum. Okay. Also, I would like to go ahead and show you all how you can generate the seller's version of the closing disclosure. So we'll get rid of this one, and I definitely apologize that if it feels like I'm going a little bit fast. I just feel like I'm kind of going a little fast here. I guess maybe because we had technical difficulties. But you would do a print preview for the seller, and let me actually go back so you guys can see that if it wasn't clear. Okay, so you would go to a print preview, and you see where it says closing disclosure, seller page 1, seller page 2. This is where this information is located for the sellers, and it's only 2 pages, so you know it's going to have a lot of information on there for the sellers to go through and look at and see exactly if there are any fees that they may have to pay, you know, as a seller that they may have committed to. So what I'm going to do here, it's 11:54. What I'm going to do is open up the panel for some questions. You guys have actually been sending some questions, and they've been outstanding questions. I'd like to go ahead and address a few of them. One of the questions is, where do I enter the seller paid and the buyer paid taxes? Okay, well the answer is the prorated taxes are entered in the summaries of transaction in section in the summaries of transactions section on page 3 of the closing disclosure. So if we go to page 3, okay, this is where that information would go. If there are any taxes or anything like that, this is, of course, the seller's transaction right here, and this is the borrower's transaction. So that information would go in these two sections here, where it says city taxes, adjustments by the seller. You can enter that information in, as well as a dollar amount. Okay, you can say from April to December, and you can put, and we'll just go ahead and do it. We'll say from April through December, and we can input a dollar amount. We'll just say $6,000. And that information, of course, is added right over here, where it says seller adjustment items paid by seller in advance. So that information would go over here. Okay, great question. Okay, this is a question here from Dawn. Dawn is wanting to know if the fees are updated on the closing costs worksheet, will they update on the loan application? Well, no. The fees on the closing costs worksheet, it's not updated on the loan application. Okay, so I hope that answers your question. That was a good question too, Dawn. Okay, let's see. Okay, here's a question here, and actually I briefly kind of went over this, but on the closing costs worksheet, this is the question here. It says, is there a signature line available on the closing cost worksheet? Then the answer is absolutely. To generate that signature in the closing disclosure, you have to select the confirm receipt box in the closing disclosure. And let me show you what I'm talking about here. Right here on page 5, where it says confirm receipt, if you click on that little box there, when we go and do a print preview, it's going to automatically have that signature line for the borrowers to sign right here at the bottom to acknowledge that they have received the closing disclosure, as well as that they've been explained the closing disclosure. Okay, so it says, here's a question here. This is from Tony. Tony's asking, okay, where's the closing date that populates into the closing disclosure? Where is that entered at? That information is entered in on page 1 of the closing disclosure, and that has to be entered in manually. Okay, that information is right up here at the very top, and you can just simply input the closing date, and that information would automatically populate over to your closing disclosure. Okay, here's a question here from Todd. Let's see. Todd wants to know, is it possible to set the confirm receipt checkbox on the closing disclosure as a default selection for all loans, or is it on a per loan basis? Well, yes, you can add this as a default in your borrower master templates. You can add that in as a default, once again, on your borrower master templates. And that was a great question, Todd. Great question. Okay, and let's see, we have time for a couple more questions. Here's a question from Valerie. Valerie wants to know, is it possible, let's see here, is it possible, let's see, it says, the real estate agent contact information that populates onto the closing disclosure, where is that information entered? That information is entered in under the track agent list tab in Point and that's where you would enter that information in right in here, or you can have that information on your Cordex. Okay, and great question, Valerie. Okay, and I have time for one more question here, and let's see here. Okay. Okay. It says, what goes in the NIC, or the Mortgage Insurance Certification? What goes in that information? That's what goes in there. The Mortgage Insurance Certification number. That's what actually goes in there. And let me go over here so you can see exactly what I'm referring to. Okay, up here at the very top where it says MIC number, that's the Mortgage Insurance Certification number. And that information, of course, it may not apply on every loan, so it may not be necessary to enter it on every loan. However, that is where you would enter in that information. I would like to go ahead and get ready to end the webinar. Please, before we get off the webinar, please make sure that you have downloaded the attachment that is located in the handout section in your control panel. Okay, and thanks for your great questions. And I once again want to apologize for the technical difficulty. Let's see here. Okay, I definitely want to apologize for the technical difficulties, but we were able to still get through it, and still some great questions. Let's see. Okay, let's see. Okay, here's a question here from Michelle. How do you keep the data from the LE so that it shows up on page 3 of the 1003? Excuse me, that it shows on page 3 of the closing disclosure. What you would simply do is you can upload that information to the doc management section, which let me give a quick illustration here. If you go to where it says forms, excuse me, I apologize, e-loan file and document management. Okay, and you can click on add, where it says add, and then you can add a point form. Okay, then it's going to give you a selection of what you would like to add. And let's say, okay, we're referring to the LE, so you can actually store now the LE in here, and that information that's on that LE, it's going to automatically flow over to the closing disclosure if it was on the fees worksheet. If those were final numbers, then that information automatically is going to flow over. I also want to give you a comparison from the closing disclosure to your loan estimate. So a good question, Michelle, and I hope that I was able to answer that for you. Donna is saying that she is unable to see the handout. Is everyone else able to see the handout? Okay. Donna, over in your control panel where it says handouts, if you click on that little plus sign, and you'll be able to access it and download it to your computer or laptop. But I'm going to go ahead and sign off at this time. Definitely want to thank you all for taking the time out to join this class. We do have another class that's going to be starting at 2 p.m. Central Standard Time, and that class is going to be over the loan estimate as well as the closing disclosure and helpful tips and hints in those particular forums. So you all have a great day. Finish having a great week. Knock out those loans, and I will talk to you all soon. Have a great day. Thank you. And I'll leave this screen up here just for a second so you all will be able to to view the information as far as our knowledge base as well as our resources. So I'll leave that up just for a couple more minutes. So you guys have a great day, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.